Welcome to the Panteva Perspective, Corporate Immigration and Global Mobility.
Welcome back to the Panteva Perspective, Corporate Immigration and Global Mobility with immigration attorney Iskra Panteva. Iskra is the founder of Panteva Law Group in Chicago, where she helps companies, entrepreneurs, and highly skilled professionals navigate the complexities of U.S. business immigration. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about what employers can do when an H-1B registration isn't selected and what alternative visa options may still allow companies to move forward with hiring. Ms. Iskra, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So, Iskra, when an employer's H-1B registration isn't selected in the lottery, what does that mean for the hiring timeline?
Well, it can definitely make a big difference in terms of hiring timeline. Usually, we have a lottery currently once a year. There has been years when the lottery was in March. By the end of March, we have the results, and that is it. We've had some other years where the applicants were selected, but a lot of them did not apply for an H-1B visa. So there was several drawers for that year. We've had as many as 4, I believe, in the year past. Obviously, that doesn't give a lot of confidence to the employer because it's a draw of luck, right? If they get it, they get it, and if they don't get it, they might rely on some subsequent withdrawings on those applications, subsequent selection processes, or they can wait for the next year. So it depends on the employee and what is their current status, whether or not they have actually any other status as a backup. And whether or not they can apply for any of the other alternatives out there. Obviously, it's not easy to decide at this point, but if you're not selected on the H-1B, a lot of times it means that you might not be able to rely on this option in the future.
What are some of the most common visa alternatives employers consider after missing that H-1B lottery?
Well, we definitely have some alternatives. Most of them are pretty narrow in terms of whether or not you can qualify for those. But there is some that are kind of more common than others. Some of the alternatives are CPT. So it's a curriculum practical training for people that are in student status and they have an ability to work in the United States while they're going through school. OPT is an optional practical training. We have an OPT and STEM OPT. OPT is a regular one for anybody that has gone through universities here in the United States, and they usually have 1 year for a practical training. So they can stay in the United States and do an internship here. Some of the beneficiaries, some of the employees can also be part of this STEM OPT. And STEM OPT allows them to work up to 3 years. And this is for majors that have, they're in science, technology, engineering, and math. Another option is a J-1 visa. A J-1 visa is kind of there is 12 different programs under that visa, but it's a cultural exchange program, usually for different cultural exchange programs, but that can be used as well. O1 is another one. Obviously, it's very difficult to qualify somebody, especially if they're just coming out from school, to qualify them as an extraordinary or somebody with extraordinary abilities, but that has been an option as well. L1A, L1B are other options. Again, those are very specific, situations. And, obviously we always encourage the employees or, beneficiaries, if they have not been selected for, depending on their current status and on their current visa and what is their immigration history, they should reach out to an attorney and discuss some of those options. Sometimes they will have some options, and sometimes, unfortunately, they will not gonna have that options. H-1B is a very high demand visa
Right.
because it fits so many so many options. It has so many options for different people and
Mhm.
different majors and companies. So, yeah.
So in what situation might the L1 visa be a viable alternative for transferring an employee instead?
Well, L1B visa is a good visa for people, or L1A or L1B visa can be a good alternative for kind of a global companies, right?
Uh,
So if they have somebody that has been here in the United States, they really, want to hire that person, they might need to transition them to a different subsidiary outside of the United States for extended period of time, at least 1 year. They can work there, and then the next, after they are kind of completing their qualifying time, they can come here to the United States on a L1B visa or L1A, depending on their position in the foreign company. So L1A and L1B can be, used, but as I said, it has to be in very specific situations where you have a global company, they have subsidiaries overseas, they are actually, the beneficiary is willing to work in a different country for extended period of time. So it's not always something that will fit as an alternative, right?
how does the O1 visa fit into the conversation when employers are, hiring highly skilled candidates?
Same thing, it's a very narrow exception or a narrow alternative. O1 visa is for people with extraordinary abilities.
Uh,
H-1B tend to be for people that are just coming out from school. So it will be, as I said, it will be very difficult for them to be qualified as an extraordinary, as people with an extraordinary abilities. Or one tend to be for the very highly qualified people, individuals. Usually we consider them at the very top 10% of everybody in their field. So if we are saying, okay, this is a mechanical engineer, in order for us to qualify a mechanical engineer as an O1 and with an O1 visa, he has to be qualified as a one of the best, you know, engineers in his field. And that will be very difficult to do, especially if you're just coming out from school, right? And you have only 1 year of experience. Again, if we're talking about people, it's a little bit easier if they're in a field of arts, maybe, or sports, or those type of in those type of cases, um, because it's a little bit easier to qualify them, but it will be much more difficult if they're in the IT or software engineering or um, in engineering at all in general. That can be a little bit more challenging to qualify those people. Yes.
so can hiring someone who is already working in the US under another status change the strategy?
Well, yes, it can change. It can definitely change the strategy. Right now, we have the famous $100,000 fee. So, if you're an H-1B employee, or you are getting selected at the lottery, and you are lucky to be selected at the lottery, if you're outside of the United States, you're subject to $100,000 fee. So, that definitely needs to be taken into account by the employers and see whether or not they're actually willing to pay that kind of fees. If they're willing to pay that, then that things are not changing. If the employee is here on a different status, they are not always subject to that fee. So there is a big difference between employees that are outside of the United States and employees that are here in a legal status, in terms of whether or not they can qualify for H-1B. In terms of alternatives, of course, there is always different rules for employees, whether or not they will be able to get a visa if they're outside of the United States. So OPT, STEM OPT will not going to be, an option for them. There will definitely be limitation in terms of what kind of visa they will qualify for. And also, let's not forget the waiting times right? Now we are looking at India, for example, and I think right now they're waiting for over a year just to get a visa on the H-1B side. So, obviously that can be very, very challenging for an employer if they need to wait. First, they filed in the lottery in March, then they have to wait until October. So that work authorization can kick in. And then on top of that, they might not be able to hire them even in October because they have to wait for Department of State to open up visa interviews, appointments for visa interviews, within a year or so. So, that's a long period of time for an employer to wait for that employee. So, really challenging for our clients at this point.
How much does the employer, the global structure influence which alternatives are available for them?
Well, as we discussed, if they really have a kind of substantial global structure, with USCIS, and I don't want to go into very philosophical points here, but the immigration side has always been much easier on the bigger employers, right? So here,
Yeah.
the same thing. If you are a small employer and you are, you have a small business in Chicago, and you're trying to get, you're trying to kind of hire somebody because you cannot find anybody here in the United States, it's going to be very hard for you to do that. It's going to be harder to do it. Now, you don't have much alternatives. Now, if you have a conglomerate, right? If you are, a big employer, you have different subsidiaries throughout the United States, you have different subsidiaries throughout the world. Obviously, alternatives like L1A, L1B they can always be taken into consideration. So you're not going to lose that employee. Um, and you can, actually make sure that they are working from day one. So maybe they need to get to start right away. Maybe they can do some remote work from overseas. It's much more, they have much more flexibility than just employers that are, smaller, and they tend to be like small businesses.
Can you share an example of a company that missed, the H-1B lottery but still moved forward using a different option?
Well, we have a lot of clients that are doing different, they do different options. Most of the time, if you are not selected on the H-1B lottery, if the employer is not able to, doesn't have an they don't have an employment authorization, and the employer is not able to continue employing those individuals, they will try to look for alternative employment authorizations. Very common, that can be CPT, um, also OPT. So sometimes if the employee has a STEM OPT that is, 2 or 3 years, they can continue working for the employer and try the next year and the next year. The problem is that we have all these individuals, right, that are not the luckiest one. We have many of our clients that have tried all 3 years and they still have not been picked up
Well,
by the lottery. So, there is certain amount of time that you can kind of buy, right? You can get one more year, you can get on a CPT, but that's not, there is always a limitation to that as well. So definitely we've had most of our clients will use STEM OPT, CPT. Sometimes we have had situations where they will qualify the employee under O1 visa, but O1 visa needs to be, it's a especially for our employers, people that tend to be small businesses and medium-sized businesses, it's very difficult for them to qualify an employee as person with extraordinary abilities unless they actually are, I sometimes I joke that this is like a Harvard application. You really need to be prepared in order for you to be able to kind of fulfill the requirements on the O1. Those people tend to be, those are not college professors, they're not university professors, they're not in research, they are in the industry. So it's really difficult for them to kind of um, to be able to look into the requirements and right away to fulfill those requirements unless they have actually worked towards, look at what are the requirements, look at, how they can publish more articles, how they can do different things, right, in order for them to fulfill some of those requirements, right? If it's going to be publishing articles about themselves, or making sure that they have more citations, or they do more conference presentations, peer review articles, a lot of different things. But those are not activities that that they do on a daily basis in the industry, right?
So are there cases where waiting for the next H-1B cycle is actually the better decision as opposed to the alternative visas?
I mean, there is always the conversation that we need to have with those employees and those employers, and see, based on the job, based on the need of the employer, based on the current status of the employee, whether or not there is alternatives. That's the most important thing. And if there are any alternatives, then we can go ahead and, and then choose those. But if there is no alternatives, then the next thing is just to wait for the next cycle, and see
Mm.
if they can maintain that employee for the next, with authorization up until the next cycle.
So when employers anticipate relying on alternatives, what early planning considerations tend to matter most in your experience?
Yeah, usually with the employers that have employees and they want to, to continue employing them, they're happy with them, they want to get them H-1B visa. Our, advice is always look at the options, all the possible options as early as possible. Make sure that you are prepared for failure, right? I mean, unfortunately, right now, we don't have, there is much more people that have been not selected that have been selected. So the percentages are really low in terms of who you are getting, how many people are getting selected in this selection process, and how many people are participating. The numbers are, very disappointing. However, you have to make sure that you understand what are the alternatives early on, and see whether or not there is a possibility for any of the alternatives to actually turn into turn into a real case, right? And actually get those employment authorization and continue employing that individual going forward. But it's not an easy decision. You have to be prepared.
All right. Miss Iskra, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's it for today's episode of the Panteva Perspective, Corporate Immigration and Global Mobility. To learn more about Iskra Panteva and the work she does with employment-based immigration, visit panteva.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.